Welcome to LinkedUp, Breaking Boundaries in Education, a podcast that focuses on what is happening in education today, connecting everyone to the movers and shakers that are breaking boundaries in the education arena.
So excited to be here today with our guest, Julie Albright. She is a digital sociologist and a counselor, an international speaker. And when Google wants to have a speaker come, who do they have? Julie Albright. Yeah, she's that good. I tell you. She's also the behavioral lead for a $121 million smart grid grant from the Department of Energy. She teaches the psychology of interactive media and sustainable infrastructure at USC. And I became familiar with her. I think maybe we met at Dept. I'm not sure. But I think that's where I met you. And then I just started following you incessantly on social media. I watch everything you do. I've watched every thing that you've had on YouTube. I buy your book. I've read your book a couple of times. And the book that she has out now is called Left to Their Own Devices. And it's how digital natives are reshaping the American dream. It was also a top 30 Bloomberg book of the year, and it is phenomenal. The things that you talk about rocked my world. She also has another book coming out that's going to be called The Cloud Machine, and she is doing that with Dean Nelson, and it will be looking at the challenges and opportunities of connecting everyone globally. And Julie, I just have to say, I'm kind of starstruck to get to talk to you in person today because I'm a fangirl, absolute fangirl of yours. So welcome. We are so glad to have you here today.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It's so kind. Thank you so much for having me. It's my pleasure.
Yes, well, it's our pleasure, I will tell you. Well, you know, when I read your book, I just, I have two kids and they're adults. And as I was reading Left to Their Own Devices, it just struck me because it's like, does she know my kids? Because everything you were saying in the book is what my kids are doing. And I think the term that you use really says it all. And it's called the untethered adults. So could you tell our listeners what you're talking about when you're talking about these untethered adults and what that means and what are the ramifications for the future with the kids doing things so much differently than our generation?
Right. Well, yeah, that's a huge question, but I'll try to kind of break it down a little bit. So, as you heard, I have a background in both sociology and I have a dual doctorate in sociology and counseling, basically. And so I've been working around kids, university level, we call them kids, college students for a number of years now. And, I noticed them changing over the years. I noticed more anxieties. I've noticed different communication patterns happening. And I've spent my career looking at the impacts of technology on society. I like to think about kind of the strands of DNA. You think about the double helix of DNA, and I think about that in terms of behavior and technology, where behavior is shaping technology and technology shaping behavior. So when I first got to USC to look at this impact of computing on society, which I knew was going to have a massive impact, they told me that we're all about new ideas. If you have a new idea, come to us. And I'm like, this is awesome. And I ran up to the guy and I said, I want to study the impact of computing on society. And he looked at me, he said, what does that have to do with sociology? And I thought, oh my gosh, are they tapping things out on stone tablets here? I couldn't believe it. So, here I'd moved across the country. I was so excited to study this and, this new frontier that was emerging. And that was the response. What are you talking about? And so, by now, the year 2020, they know what we're talking about. And it turns out that, I was kind of standing ahead of that wave and it's caught up in terms of people's awareness of this impact. Walk on any street in the world now, I dare you, and you're going to see someone with a phone with their head bent over. It's almost like an international sign. You could make that, that head bent over looking at a phone, and anybody would recognize what that is now, right? So it's not some fringe thing anymore. Yeah. This idea that digital technologies have immersed and sort of intertwined, if you will, with our everyday lives. And what's happening now is you've got little children growing up in a world where there always was an internet. So you've got millennials and older. Millennial group grew up and younger, where there always was an internet. And then you've got younger growing up than that, where there always was mobility. In other words, like smartphones that are connected to the internet, iPads and other similar devices. Then you've got the youngest children now coming up from infancy on, growing up in a world where there always was digital agents, intelligent agents like the Siris and the Alexas and things like that, where they're going to be used to, and indeed just a natural part of their zeitgeist is talking to a digital agent and interacting with a digital agent. So little kids now are actually developing digital skills before acquiring language, which is going to rewire their neural pathways. So they're going to think differently than you do. So this is seismic. This isn't just I'm looking at Facebook once in a while. This is literally going to change the direction of human evolution, our physicality. It's changing how we relate to nature and our bodies and each other. This really interacts with every aspect of what it means to be human.
I have a friend that told me her child could type his name on the iPad before he could write his name.
Wow. There you go.
It's just so interesting. And there's so many things I think happening behind the scenes that people like my age are so oblivious to. I don't even think that we realize some of these things that are happening behind the scenes. I know you talk about like some of those jobs, the best jobs out there that nobody knows about. Right. What are you even talking about?
Right. Well, so I'll kind of take it and say, one of the cornerstone ideas in this book is, and what I did with this book, by the way, is I actually looked at studies not simply from sociology, but from a variety of fields, from child development and education to psychology and sociology, to political science, to neuropsychology and neuropsychiatry and things of that, to business, et cetera, et cetera. And I synthesized together what the patterns are. I think that's really my forte, is being able, I like to say, I see the constellation in the stars. Mm. So the idea that, there are all these disparate studies out there, but I can sort of draw the connections to make those constellations. And what I realized after looking at studies from a variety of fields, one would think, oh, this is coming from medicine, this is coming from psychology, this is coming from child development. But I realized that they all fell under the same umbrella, an umbrella that I call coming untethered. And this is this idea that young people in particular are unhooking from traditional ways of doing things, from things like getting married, buying a home, from living in a neighborhood and going to the local church and things like that, from having children. So they're unhooking from what you can consider as a shorthand, the idea of the American dream. And this is not simply happening in America, by the way. This is also happening in Japan. It's happening in Western Europe. And when I spoke in China, they came running up to me there and said, we're seeing the same thing with our millennials. So it was really stunning to me. So that's why the final chapter in that book talks about the untethered world. And that's where the next book is going to take off. I'm going to explore that notion further. But this idea that some of these changes are driven by digital technologies and some of them are a response to digital technologies, but it's really reshaping expectations, including jobs. For example, the idea of the work from home or work from anywhere began with these sort of leading edge digital natives, we'll call them, that are millennials. And, the majority of them said, well, I don't think I have the ability. This is 7 out of 10 of them said this. Listen to this. I don't have the ability to work remotely. I have a right to work remotely. So, I mean, their idea that it's facilitated, this idea of you can work on your laptop at Starbucks anywhere or something like that, it's facilitated by Wi-Fi and digital connectivity, but it's changing perceptions and values about how life not only could be, but should be. And it's from seismic ways, from baby boomers, let's say, to millennials and now those generations following. So it's completely reshaping life as we know it. So if you're unhooking or untethering from buying a home, getting married, joining a church, joining local clubs like the Rotary or any of these as you're in a young career stage, you suddenly are free to, you're like the Rolling Stone gathering no moss. You're free to live anywhere, be anywhere, you see? So these things intersect then with your question about the jobs. Well, gee, I'm not married. I can go work in Bali on my laptop and poolside and then go surfing during the day and work again. So this idea of work anywhere, anytime in your pajamas started with this hipster thing, but in this COVID moment, all of this has been amplified and accelerated such that now it's kind of impacting everybody. Now everybody's working from home. Everybody's choosing where and how they work with this connectivity. So these trends that I'm tracing in the book have now amplified and expanded to a much larger group.
Yes. Well, a couple of things. First of all, I just see my kids in this because my son, upon graduating from college, wanted to go make wine in Napa. And now he wants to make beer in Denver and has no intention of buying a house. Says, I don't want to be tied down to that. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And, you know, I get it. I like that idea. But the other thing that I'm hearing, which is interesting, we visit with a lot of superintendents across the country, and they're saying a thing that they're noticing this fall is it's hard on our teachers getting them back in the buildings after working at home. Interesting. I wonder what your take is on that from the sociologist counselor point of view, that these teachers are having a hard time coming back after they've been home all this time.
And almost feeling like you said, I think before, you know, and like that right almost, right? So it's there is that the expectations are changing. And it's different because in other parts of our world and in other businesses, it seems to be more of a right. It seems to be a much different transition with schools, I think, too. So it's really interesting to see how that's kind of coming together. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's been, you know, that's a really interesting question. It's been, I will say from just my casual observations of it, it's been a challenge, especially for older professors to suddenly be thrust into an online environment where they have to translate their pedagogy into this sort of new world that they may never have used Zoom in their life. Now they're expected to be on there every week or even every day, you know, doing maybe slides as opposed to writing on a board or something like that. And in some cases, the students have been having a ball with this because of the teachers' maybe elementary grasp of digital technologies. There are, you may have seen them, a multitude now of videos on TikTok of students pranking their teachers, doing everything from a coordinated TikTok dance all of a sudden with the teacher looking around in bewilderment, what's happening, to staging kidnappings of a student. And so you see people breaking in and carrying the student off, to throwing the teacher out of the classroom or changing her name or his name in the classroom. So, I mean, they're running these kids grew up, now you're in their world. Yeah. And these kids grew up immersed in this, and the teachers are kind of feeling and flailing around, and the students are having a field day, you know, pranking these. And there's a whole series, prank that you can look up hashtags on TikTok and see a plethora of these videos. And then here's how you prank your teacher. And now other kids are doing it. So feel for these teachers. I see their grim faces in the Zoom. They had Zoom trainings and things at USC, and the grim faces of the professors trying to get it really quick, and then they're showing up with more trainings. And I feel for these teachers. I think it's a lot more work for them to translate as opposed to just writing on a board, making all the slides. And sometimes you're pre-recording it and uploading and downloading. It's probably 4 to 6 more times more work to create online classes than it is to do it face-to-face, to be honest with you. So I think the teachers right now deserve a lot of kudos and a lot of understanding that, I see their tired faces on these TikTok videos.
Right.
And they're trying so hard. And I think it's a real, for some of them, the transition is a real uphill, especially if they're further behind on the digital transformation road pathway. If they're further behind, they have to quickly catch up, and it's a lot to learn fast.
So, as a sociologist, you've done a lot of work with teens and young adults. So how do you see their contributions in post-COVID? So, in this post-COVID world, what have you considered that school systems might do differently, maybe even to prepare students in this new world?
Right. Well, I think I talked to students about this. One of the talks I did at Google and other places is this idea of, how do we attract a new worker? What are the perks we need to be thinking about? So I actually talked to some of my students about this to see what was on top of mind for them. And one of the key issues and one of the drivers of me writing this book is the idea of seeking wellness. We have, and what sort of got me was, we have the highest rates in the college now, in not just at USC, but across the nation I'm talking about, of anxiety and depression amongst young people that we've seen in 30 years. And, frankly, as someone who has a master's and PhD in counseling, it concerns me. And so I that's part of the driver of writing that book. It's like, what changed? What has changed where now we're at that level? Something happened. It didn't just suddenly out of nowhere. Well, social media happened. All this connectivity happened, and it disconnected us from many of the things that stabilize us, from our friends and relationships, marriage, family, the church. All these things are what we call stabilizing social structures. And young people have become untethered from all these things. And the impact is that. So this idea, I think that we need to somehow encourage wellness behaviors. It's not a miracle that you feel good or you're healthy physically and mentally. There are habits that you can cultivate, including a good diet, including exercise, time away from your screen, time in relationships with friends and family, where you're just talking without being mediated by a device. And these are the kinds of things that I'm outlining in this book. It's a road back to wellness. And that's really what this book is about. And that's what I think we need as a society, and as the adults and leaders in the society, the teachers, the professors. We need to encourage these kinds of behaviors so that we can get these kids back on this road to happiness, road to wellness again. And I think that is number one. And that what was so interesting to me, to your question, when I asked them, what do you want to see in terms of perks? They talked about things like having a gym on site, having counseling and medical services available to them. Okay. That was one of the top things that they came up with.
They recognize
this idea, they recognize it and asked for it as a perk for their jobs.
Okay.
So this idea of having access and an emphasis on wellness as part of corporate culture, as part of, I would say, what we're teaching children. And again, this could be extracurricular if you look at it that way. But to me, if you don't have a foundation of basic wellness, all this other stuff goes to heck. You see what I'm saying? Like the whole house collapses if you don't have a foundation. And we've lost the foundation. So that's why I'm trying to get back to foundational ideas around wellness. And that's where that book, that's really the heart of Left to Their Own Devices is, they are left to their own devices. And a lot of the things that they've come untethered from were the very things that were anchoring them in physical and mental health. So we need to, I'm not saying throw away devices, but what I'm saying is we should step back and examine and say, where do we go so desperately wrong? And how do we get back on that road to happiness?
Yeah, I think it's so fascinating, number one. Number two, I really appreciate the fact that they recognize that it is needed. And then hopefully in the future, as you talked about before, it will become an expectation and a right, so that it will be part of the norm, because we are in this vicious cycle. Not only do we need our devices for our everyday, right? We've also become addicted to them, because we want to be on the go, and we want to be able to have access to our work, but also our social, yet at the same time, it's pulling us apart from our foundational, what did you describe it as? Our needs, right? With our connections, right? So it's connecting us to the outside world, but it's disconnecting us from what we need, right? And so, but I feel like it's this vicious cycle. And another part of this cycle is the fact that some of these, not only is it that we need these in order to function in our everyday lives and our work, but also some of these are addictive. Right. So I know, like Snapchat, right? I'm seeing these kids, like they're looking at their phones. Like, okay, so you have your little icon that you described as the person looking down, right? And we know what that means. Yeah. But also you see these kids, right? And then they do this little face and this little this, and they're just kind of like they're moving along with whatever's on their screen, and they have to have.
It's performative. Yeah.
It's exhausting.
It's all performative.
It is. And it's just, it becomes addictive, and it becomes part of this vicious cycle. So I guess what you're saying is that your book is going to be addressing this, right? The mindfulness that is necessary in order to try to have a balance.
That's it, the balance.
These kids also recognize they need this balance.
I'll tell you an interesting little story at USC that happened. I did a panel at our LA Times Festival of Books with the head of our religious studies, Dean Soni. He's a rock star. He's interviewed Deepak Chopra and the Dalai Lama, and now me. So I don't know how I got in that lineup, but somehow this guy's a rock star. Wow. And he, at the event, he said that a kid came up to him. We have a whole new campus that's 36 acres or so, with a new dining hall that looks like Hogwarts. I mean, it's this whole fabulous campus with living and restaurants and things. And a kid came up to Dean Soni and said, Dean Soni, could we set aside a table for no devices in the new dining hall, and so we can talk to each other? And he said, what are you talking about? The kid said, have you been in the new dining hall? And he said, no. And he goes, everyone is on their own device and no one talks to each other, period. Wow. And Dean Soni was blown away. And then he says to himself, and he was kind of thinking out loud, saying, okay, so wait a minute. If I set aside one table for no devices, am I saying it's okay for the 90% of the rest of the tables to not talk to each other? You know, suddenly he was in this dilemma going, oh my gosh, but that's exactly what's happening. And I had a sorority mom say that some of the girls have lost the art of conversation because of that lack of the face-to-face experience. Yes, they'll talk for a few minutes, run out of things to say, she says, pick up their phone and start texting someone else outside. So this idea that, you know, young people often lack the experience in phone calls, in face-to-face interactions and things like that, because everything goes mediated through a device. Yes. A study came out recently that said they're more likely to talk to their best friend via a device than face-to-face or on a phone call. So point being, we're not just talking about the social, which that's part of that building up of that wellness, but think about what this means as these young people are going into the workforce without the experience of making the phone call, without the experience of the face-to-face and breaking the ice with a new client, for example. And there's a real waning in some of these skills that are really critical for success. So somehow these things, we need to set aside these sort of sacred spaces at the family dinner table, someplace at school. Maybe we have those areas where people can talk to one another. We need to set aside, as you said, the mindfulness, have the mindfulness about that we need this, and have some spaces without devices so that we can reconnect with each other, reconnect with ourselves, our bodies, with nature, and a spiritual sense of the world.
I'm hoping that at some point, I'm hoping that we're in a transition right now, and that we're trying to navigate and figure out how we can make these devices part of our lives, yet not take over our lives. And instead that we have etiquette that is involved. So I know in my own home, we don't allow devices at the table. Sometimes we have the TV on, and that's not cool either.
That's a great start right there. Great start right there.
But what you just said is also, let's try to make it so that when you go into a dining hall, that we don't see devices, that it is the norm, that if you do see someone with it, everyone kind of gets aghast. Like, there needs to be this etiquette in place. I'm hoping we're in a transition right now, and that we can get to a place where we look around, and when we are eating, this is a time for conversation instead.
Yes.
Because it is frightening.
That would be nice.
It's frightening.
It is frightening. It is frightening. And I think step one, and if I put my counselor hat on, and you know this just by sort of intuition, step one to changing something is admitting that you have a problem, right?
Yeah.
So we kind of have to get to that point going, yeah, it's fun to do TikTok videos. It's fun to post on Instagram pictures of your lunch. It's fun to go on social media. It's fun to text your friends and stuff like that. But there has to be the pendulum swung so far. And the outcome again is no coincidence. As we untether, we've suddenly come unmoored, particularly young people, and that's what concerns me. And it drives those unhealthy mental and physical health behaviors. So, there was a study that said that I put in this book, only 6% of kids play outside anymore.
Right.
If you drive through little suburban neighborhoods around, you're going to see these ghost town streets that used to be, filled with kids playing basketball and kids on skateboards and bikes. And they're inside playing on devices and playing video games and such. And all of a sudden their bodies are impacted, and the body is linked to the mind and mental health. So physicality lifts your spirits. There's brain chemical changes that happen when you're active and you exercise. So these things are waning, you see? So it's a whole constellation of behavior changes that we need to make little tweaks here and there. Like you said, it doesn't have to be, I'm not trying to be Amish, throw out all our devices and electricity and everything else, but we need to rebalance again.
Adults are not good role models either.
No, terrible role models.
I'm guilty too.
Horrible role models. Because kids are trying to get attention from their parents, and the parents are addicted, as you said. That the phones are meant and designed to keep you hooked in. And so parents are mesmerized, and little kids trying to get attention. How sad is that?
Right.
I saw one video of a kid that was practically drowning, and the little kid couldn't even speak, but realized something was wrong and was trying to alert the mother and go away, I'm watching something, and then realized my kid's drowning, and then but it's the same process. We all get sucked in, as Jamie was saying. And it's designed for that. Don't kid yourself. This isn't accidental. There are people that understand behavioral triggers, and these are baked into these devices now. If you think about, for example, the one-armed bandit, the slot machine, right? Pulling the lever, pushing the button, ding, 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 ding. Lights are flashing, I won. That is built upon something that psychologists call random reinforcement. I don't know if you've ever played those slot machines, but people play, and you see them, I won. Well, they don't just gather up the chips or whatever and walk away, do they? Maybe I'll win again, ding, ding, ding. Now they're addictive, as you said. And that's called random reinforcement. It means sometimes you win, sometimes you don't win. Maybe next poll I'll win, next poll. Yeah. That's the most powerful behavioral driver that we know of, okay? That's what TikTok is. That's what Instagram is. That's what Facebook is. You're scrolling, ding, 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 ding. Sometimes you're hitting on, wow, that's so amazing, so funny, so fascinating, so shocking. And then sometimes, meh, I've seen that, nothing new, scrolling on. It's exactly like the slot machine. And we know gambling's addictive, okay? So it's the exact same behavioral driver baked into these programs, that in these apps, that are getting you to keep coming back for more. That's why it's so hard. And that's why the parents fall victim to it just as much as a kid does.
Absolutely. And I try to do like, all right, I can scroll for like 10 people and then that's it, I'm done. I have to. And then I realized, oh, it got me again when I realized the time had gone by. So I think I'm trying to go to a timer next is my goal. Because it's just addictive and it wastes my time. It gets me so angry sometimes because it takes over. So, and again, so just like you said, it's not just kids. It's designed to pull anyone in. And so, like I said,
keep you in.
And keep you in. So I hope we're in a transition, and I hope that, we can find some learned behaviors that will bring us back so we have a healthy balance. And I'm hoping that your book is going to help me do that. So I'll get that. One other thing before we end, I know that your sustainable energy is super important to you. And that also innovative technologies have a global impact on things like climate change. What have you found? Can you tell us about that?
Well, I think that's the thing. I'm teaching a course. I've been teaching a course for the last 5 years or so at USC called Sustainable Infrastructure. And I work with a group called Infrastructure Masons. And these are executives from the top company, all the companies the Googles and the Facebooks, the Apples, the Microsofts, they're all part of this group. And one thing, when you think about it, I learned in my master's, my first master's is in social and systemic studies. It's a marriage and family therapy degree, but it's about thinking systemically, thinking in a context. And I learned that. And it really, I think that many of us are trained in a psychological model, just even by osmosis, just going through life. Seeing things as individual, seeing individual motives, individual behaviors. But this degree taught me to look at systems. In other words, you are in a context of a family, in a context of a neighborhood, in a context of a culture, a nation state, a globe, an ecosystem, right? So the thing is, our behaviors have a larger impact, our collective behaviors, the sociology of it. And now when you've got this shift toward, we're now in a digital era where everything is connected to digital. Well, digital is connected to electricity. So now we're using more and more devices, everything's becoming digitized, even things like water systems, waste system, these self-driving cars, that takes so much data and so much power, you wouldn't even believe it. So we're driving toward more intensification uses of power and data around the globe. So the thing is, what's top of mind for a lot of these guys that are running these systems, and myself, is thinking about how to green data, let's say. How do we become more sustainable in what we're doing? And that's where we need kids that are out of the box thinkers to design new systems, new ways of heating and cooling, new battery storage technologies so that we can capture the energy from the sun and store it in batteries that are more dense and drive all of our machines and data centers and everything that runs with these batteries. We're seeing the impacts of climate change now, and waste and water. And by the way, water is tied into energy production. People don't know that. Most people don't realize that. So you've got these data centers that are going to be using large amounts of energy and also water. And as population grows, guess what they need more of? More water. So you're going to have these water wars emerging. So we need more efficient use of water, more efficient use of power. So that's why if kids particularly, I have a lot of hope for the future. They have as one of their key values, even little kids, the environment and green and sustainability. I see the kids now all carry these reusable water bottles. They didn't do that 10 years ago. They all do that now. So I see the shift in the behaviors and in the mindset and in the values. So, this idea of just encouraging kids to think about their future and the future of the world and the future of our animals and our birds and our fish and everything around us. We need to really think more sustainably on a global and understand that we're all interconnected. It's not just you here in the United States. Everything has a global impact now. And so that's hopefully what we can start thinking more systemically, thinking about the impacts of our behaviors, and then collectively how that amplifies and how maybe we can do things differently.
Is that what your new book will be about?
That's going to be part of it. Yeah. I'm going to talk about greening the data center and how we can, rethink our behaviors. And, as we start to build out these systems in places like Africa, which is where a lot of the development is going to go next, how can we not make the same mistakes that we've made, with coal-fired energy plants, for example? How can we do things a little bit better? But I think, there's always room for innovation and new ideas. And I see that at USC and our engineering students, some bright hope for the future. But this idea of really talking about climate change and thinking about the environment and our responsibility as good shepherds of our world. We're the stewards of this world. And frankly, we haven't really done that great of a job. So we have to really rethink all our behaviors around that. And our clothes buying, our, showing off on Instagram, like all these things have an impact on climate and on sustainability and on our environment and on our plants and animals and fish and all that. So we need to really think about all that, what those behaviors that are driven by social media, what the impacts are.
Yeah. So leveraging technology to get back to the basics so that way we can have a healthy balance, I think is really the theme here. Yeah. Yeah, it's important because we're just kind of, and I think too, it's thinking in that context too. So that way it really makes purpose and meaning and bringing that to our lives. And again, using the technology to think out of the box in order to get sustainable. Yeah.
And purpose and meaning is really what brings contentment to life, I think. And maybe some young people don't have that sense of purpose and meaning. A lot of things that they used to build and do where you'd get that satisfaction of making something or cooking something, all those things have sort of been wiped off the table. So where do you find that sense of contentment? Through purpose and meaning. So reestablishing that and thinking of someone else other than yourself and helping someone else. I think those are very important things to do just for again, getting back to that wellness issue again. Help someone else, and it helps yourself in the long run,
Absolutely. Jerry wasn't kidding. This is fascinating. And I feel like we've only had the tip of the iceberg. So I'm hoping that you'll join us again because there's still more to talk about. And I feel like it was, I got a little anxious throughout our conversation and it worried me, but I think you're also bringing hope to this. And so I'm looking for that hope. I'm looking for all of us to, again, bring back that wellness and so that we have a better balance in our lives.
Yeah. And I think, again, I've tried to provide that roadmap by showing us where we fell off the road to happiness and where we can get back on it. And it's not a miracle. It's not some mystical thing. There are specific things we can do and get a hold of, each of us, to find purpose and meaning and health and wellness and happiness. And it's not necessarily found in an app on your phone. So step away from the devices, at least for a time,
I appreciate you bringing all of this to our attention and making us think about it and putting some thought into it. As an educator, your book had so much meaning to me as to how we can rethink how we're working with students and what we're being a role model about and how we can help. So I really appreciate your contribution.
Thank you.
Well, my mother was a multi-decade-long librarian and teacher. And all of her friends are teachers, and I have a lot of love for the profession. And education. And I think that there's a strong component of that in that book, speaking directly to educators. So hopefully that will help provide that roadmap back to where we need to be.
Absolutely.
Good.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a wonderful conversation.
It was.
Thank you for listening. And if you would like to stay linked up, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube.